In this video, we're going to talk about polygonal modeling in Maya. So we started with creating curves and we proceed with creating the first NURBS objects. And we talked about the difference between the NURBS modeling features and tools and the polygonal modeling primitives. And we're going to see now how we can use those primitives there as a starting point to create more complex objects in polygonal modeling fashion. So I'm going to create here a new scene starting all over again, and I'm going to start with simple concepts as always, and then we will proceed with more complex and more advanced notions. So just as any section in this video course and in any video course, we're going to start simple. So I'm going to start here with a simple plane, and by increasing the width and the height. So this is the thing that we already know how to do on the attribute editor. We can set up parameters, and we talked about subdivisions earlier, and we're gonna see how the number of subdivision is really important, especially when we talk about polygonal modeling. Starting with the right amount of subdivision can help us to save a lot of time and to set up our work correctly so that we can be faster later. So let's go forward here, and let's go with a cube. So that's actually a 3D object because a plane is still a 2D object. And this is the simplest object of all. And it's composed by 6 faces. And well, faces are basically polygons. So when we talk about polygonal modeling, we're actually talking about modeling using faces. Now we're gonna also get back here to the channel box because we can see here that we can work more precisely using parameters. So this is still a parametric object. So every time we work with parameters, we can switch from absolute to relative. So we saw that the difference there is that when we are in absolute, we are considering the coordinates of the world. When we are in relative, we are considering the relative coordinates of a particular sub-object, like a vertex or a face or an edge. And also here we can still edit the people just as we did in the earlier version. And here I'm gonna start by placing the people using the snap to the points to a corner. Again, I'm going faster here because we already talked about all these different features and tools earlier, so I'm gonna go faster. So when I place the pivot there, now I can perfectly place my cube here in the exact position in the height to place it correctly into the epsilon 0, which means that it's going to be perfectly placed on the pavement there. And the pavement right now is our grid, which represents the work plane there of the Z and the X. And this is to show you that we can work precisely. So we can work using precise measures and create objects like architecture, like walls or pillars or beams or columns. We can create them really, really precise. And we're also gonna talk about the modeling toolkit here, which is specific for polygonal modeling. And also if we right click, we can access vertices. So we can select those vertices there, or we can select edges, or we can select faces, which are again polygons. So you can do that also here in the panel on the right. You can see I can select also the UV texture. So that's something concerning materials and textures. We're gonna see that later on. Right now we will focus on polygonal modeling and using all these different sub-objects. So again, sub-objects are vertices, edges, polygons, and this is the entire object again. So when we finish to model, we can go back to our original selection, which is the object mode, and then go back and forward, go there and edit again the faces or polygons, and go back then to the object. Now you can see that we can move the, well, let's deactivate the snap right now because it's snapping to the floor. So I'm gonna deactivate it. So you can see that I can move just one face. I can edit this single face, which is part of my object, and also this other one here. And it's kind of like scaling like we did before with the scale tool, but this time is not coming from the middle of the object or from the pivot, but we can scale, we can modify, we can model using anything here in our polygonal object. So let's try with vertices. Now using 4 vertices it's equal to use one face, but if we change one single vertex, that's gonna be different. You can see that I can kind of deform my primitive box there, my primitive cube can be deformed. And if I select 2 vertices, it's gonna be equal to select one single edge. So again, we can work with faces, we can work with vertices, we can work with edges, depending on what we need to do. It's better to use one or the other. This is something you're gonna figure out. Now, 4 edges means one face. So if we select 4 vertices or 4 edges, this will mean one face. Now, if we go back to the editing mode here to add more subdivisions, you can see that things are gonna get messy. Why? Because we can use some parameters only before we start to edit our object. Once we started to do polygonal modeling, which is editing the vertices, the edges, and the faces, we usually cannot go back to the original parameters of that primitive. So you need to do everything you have to do with the parameters before you actually start to edit your model, and then that's it. Then you're only gonna continue with the polygonal modeling. You're never gonna go back there to the parameters. But don't worry about that, because we have a lot of editing tools here. We can do really a lot of things. Well, basically anything to create any type of model, architectural model. You can create also organic models. We will see that later. So let's get here and start to see something else. Well, we can also rotate the sub-objects like faces, vertices, and edges. We can also scale. So this is gonna like taper our object using that face. We can do that in 1D, 2D, 3D scaling, just as we did for the object. Same thing we can do with the edges, with the single points or vertices, and with the whole face. And you can see how I'm creating something really strange here and really, well, pretty different from what we see so far, which were like standard primitives or NURBS objects created from curves. We are not using curves here. We are just using a single cube, and it's becoming kind of a deformed pyramid here, something like that. I'm just like experimenting, which is something that I always suggest to do. Just experiment there. Try to experiment a lot and find new ways, new paths to creation of objects. And again, I'm gonna go back here to object mode. I'm gonna place this aside, and we're gonna continue with more features and tools. Now let's create again another cube. And well, you can see that if you use snaps, pivot, and all those stuff, you're gonna take more time. So sometimes it's better to work more precise. Sometimes you can work faster being less precise. Now, here I want to just figure out how many subdivisions I need before actually getting into the polygonal modeling part, because this is going to help me to be faster later on. So what I'm going to do here is going to the